I've been holding this in for 8 years, and I just need to get it out. My name's Brian. I'm 58 now, but this all started when I was 50. I was married to my wife, Lori, for 25 years. We had 2 kids, Josh, 27, and Haley, 25. From the outside, we probably looked like one of those solid families, the kind that had life all figured out. But behind closed doors, we were already falling apart. Lori and I met in college. She was sharp, funny, and always the center of attention. Before we had kids, she worked as an office manager at a small company. She loved it. She was good at it. But when Josh was born, we made the decision, her decision, really, for her to stay home. Then came Haley, and suddenly, her career wasn't just on hold. It was gone. I worked in IT, grinding out long hours to keep us afloat. The plan had always been for Lori to go back to work once the kids got older, but she never did. Somewhere along the way, she stopped talking about it. Stopped talking about a lot of things, really. I told myself we were a team. I brought in the paycheck. She handled everything at home. But as the years passed, I noticed things, little things. The resentment in her eyes when she looked at me. The way she sighed when she thought I wasn't listening. Then, she started changing. New hair, new clothes, expensive perfume that I knew I hadn't bought her. She started going out more. Girls' nights, she called them. Community events. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the night she told me she had a book club meeting at 8 p.m., something in my gut told me she was lying. So, for the first time in our marriage, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. I watched as she pulled into a cafe across town, looking around like she was checking for someone. Then, a man walked in. Mid-40s, good-looking, dressed too well for a casual coffee. She lit up when she saw him. They sat together, leaning in close, laughing like they were the only 2 people in the world. At first, I told myself it could be innocent. Maybe a friend, maybe someone from those so-called community events. Then, they left, holding hands, and they got into his car. I followed them to a hotel. They didn't hesitate, didn't look around, just walked right in. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, cause a scene. But what was the point? I had seen enough. When I got home, I packed a bag, left a note on the kitchen counter. Sir, I know what you're doing. Don't bother lying. Sir. Then I walked out. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. When I confronted Lori, she didn't even pretend to be surprised. She just sat there, calm as ever, like she'd been waiting for this moment. When I told her what I had seen, the cafe, the hotel, she simply nodded and said, "Well, I guess there's no point in lying, is there?" That's when I found out the truth. His name was Rick, and he wasn't just some fling. She had been seeing him for over a year, and apparently, he had everything I didn't. Money, success, excitement. "Rick makes me feel appreciated," she said. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I still loved her, because I didn't. I think I had stopped loving her a long time ago. But the sheer casualness of it, that burned. She didn't beg for forgiveness, didn't even cry. She just listed her reasons. Like this was a business decision. She was lonely. She felt like we had drifted apart. She missed feeling wanted. Then she hit me with, "You've been so focused on work for years, I didn't think you even noticed me anymore." I stared at her, my fists clenched at my sides. "You had 25 years to tell me you were unhappy," I said, my voice low. "But instead, you snuck around behind my back." She had the nerve to tilt her head, like she actually expected me to consider her side. "You're really filing for divorce?" she asked. I almost laughed. "I'm done," I said. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." She didn't argue. She just said, "All right. I guess this is for the best." So cold, so calculated. The hardest part wasn't leaving Lori. It was telling Josh and Haley. I knew it was going to hit them hard. I knew they wouldn't want to hear it. But I really thought, they'd have my back. I was wrong. I told Josh first. Took him out to the diner he always loved as a kid, the one with the greasy burgers and cheap coffee. I figured if we were somewhere familiar, somewhere comfortable. Maybe he'd take it better. I was an idiot. When I told him, his first reaction wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was annoyance. Come on, Dad, he sighed, setting his phone down. Are you sure you're not blowing this out of proportion? Maybe you guys just need counseling or something. I blinked. Josh, she's been having an affair. For over a year. He leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms. Yeah, but, Mom's been a stay-at-home mom for years. Don't you think maybe she just felt stuck? Lonely? I gritted my teeth. She needed to cheat on me? Josh shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. I just think 25 years is worth fighting for. Maybe you shouldn't rush into this. I stared at him, waiting for him to realize how ridiculous he sounded. He never did. By the time I left the diner, it was clear. Josh wasn't on my side. I still had hope for Haley. That hope died 5 minutes into our conversation. We met at a park near her apartment. She listened, arms crossed, her face unreadable. When I finished, she just sighed. Okay, she said flatly. So what are you gonna do? I already filed, I said. Her jaw tensed. Isn't that a little drastic? I swallowed the sharp sting in my chest. Drastic? I repeated. Haley, she's been sleeping with another man for a year. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Haley shook her head. You don't get it. Mom gave up everything for us. Her career, her independence. She put her whole life on hold for you and Josh and me. I exhaled slowly. And that means she gets a free pass to cheat? Haley looked away. I'm just saying, it's not black and white. I realized then, I had already lost them. Not just Lori, Josh, Haley, my whole damn family. And the worst part? They didn't even care. The weeks after the divorce were a blur. Not because I was grieving. I wasn't. I think, in a way, I had already mourned the loss of my marriage long before I caught Lori cheating. But the sheer emptiness of it all, that got to me. I had spent 25 years building a life, a home, a family. And now? Now I was sitting in a half-empty apartment, eating microwave dinners and listening to a fridge hum because there was nothing else to fill the silence. I tried reaching out to Josh and Haley at first. Not to beg, not to explain, just to talk. But every time, I got the same thing. Short, clipped responses. Dry text that might as well have come from a stranger. Then the pictures started popping up. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, birthdays. And I wasn't in any of them. Instead, I saw him, Rick, standing where I used to stand, sitting at my dining table, smiling with my kids. In one photo, it was Haley's engagement party. Rick stood beside her, his arm around her like he had raised her. Lori looked radiant, beaming, holding a glass of wine. Josh was in the background, laughing. And me? I wasn't even a thought. That's when it finally sank in. I hadn't just lost my wife. I had lost my kids. I stopped trying, stopped texting, stopped waiting for an invite that would never come. Instead, I threw myself into work. Not because I loved it, because I needed something to keep me from thinking. The long hours, the endless projects, they became my escape. I volunteered for every extra shift, stayed late, kept my head down. People started calling me a workaholic. Maybe I was. Then, one night, about 9 months after the divorce, I made the mistake of calling Josh. It was late. I had just finished eating a half-warm, sad excuse for a dinner when the loneliness hit me like a ton of bricks. I stared at my phone for a long time before I pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Hey, Dad. He sounded distracted. In the background, I could hear voices. Laughter. The faint hum of a TV. He was busy. He had a life. Hey, Josh, I said, trying to sound casual. I was just thinking, why don't you and Emily come over for dinner one night this week? It's been a while. There was a long pause. Then, he sighed. I'd like to, Dad, but we're super busy right now. Wedding planning, you know? Maybe some other time. I swallowed hard, forced a smile he couldn't see. Sure, I get it. Another time. Yeah, for sure, he said. I'll call you when things settle down. He never did. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't a priority in their lives anymore. I was just an obligation they occasionally remembered when it was convenient. The next morning, I woke up, went to work, and didn't call again. Instead, I moved forward. I focused on my job, on saving money, on just getting through each day. Then, one day Martin, a guy I worked with, pitched an idea. "You ever think about starting your own thing?" he asked me over coffee. I laughed. "Martin, I'm not exactly a risk taker." "You don't have to be. I've got the business side down. You've got the tech skills. Cybersecurity is blowing up right now. If we do this right, we could actually make something of it." I almost brushed him off. But later that night, sitting alone in that damn apartment, I thought, what do I have to lose? So, I said yes. The first couple of years were brutal. We worked insane hours, juggling our day jobs while trying to build the business. I slept less than I ever had. There were nights I fell asleep at my desk, only to wake up and keep grinding. We hit roadblocks, lost clients, faced rejection after rejection, but we kept pushing. And one day, it clicked. We landed a few big contracts, built a reputation. By the time I hit 58, we had made it. I wasn't rich, but for the first time in my life, I was comfortable. I had a house, a real house, not some depressing apartment. I had security, stability, and I had moved on. I started dating again. At first, it was awkward. What do you even talk about when you've been out of the game for 25 years? But then I met Allison. She wasn't looking for someone to fix her. She had her own life, her own career. She was a widow. Her husband had died in a car accident a few years before we met, and she understood loss in a way most people didn't. We clicked. A year later, we got married. A year after that, we had our daughter, Sophie. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. Then, out of nowhere, Josh and Haley came back. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was mowing the lawn when I saw the car pull into my driveway. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there they were, standing outside my house like it hadn't been 8 years since I last saw them. I shut off the mower, wiped the sweat off my forehead, my heart pounding. Haley smiled. "Dad." Josh stood behind her, holding a toddler. And for a moment, just a moment, that flicker of hope came back. Maybe they were here to reconnect. Maybe they finally understood what they had done. Maybe they wanted to fix things. "It's been too long," Haley said, stepping forward and giving me a quick hug. "Yeah," I muttered, still trying to process what the hell was happening. We stood there in awkward silence before Josh cleared his throat. "Mind if we come in?" I hesitated. Then, stupidly, I nodded. "Sure." Inside, they walked around, commenting on the house. How nice it was. How much I had really come up in the world. I didn't pick up on the vibe at first. I was too caught up in the moment. We sat in the living room, and they were too friendly, asking about my work, complimenting the house, saying how much they'd missed me. Then, after about 20 minutes of small talk, Josh leaned forward. "Dad, we need to ask you something." I should have known. I should have seen it coming. "Sure," I said. He glanced at Haley. She gave him a little nod. Then he said it. "We could really use your help. Financially." Everything inside me went cold. For 8 years, they ignored me. For 8 years, I was nothing to them. And now, suddenly, when I was doing well, they wanted to reconnect? It wasn't about family. It wasn't about fixing things. It was about money. I kept my face neutral. "I'll think about it." They left soon after, thanking me like I had already agreed. The second they were gone, I blocked their numbers. For years, I had dreamed of the moment when my kids would come back, when we'd sit down and have an honest conversation, when we'd rebuild what we lost. But now I knew that moment was never going to happen. A week passed, and I thought that was the end of it. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be used. Josh and Haley had shut me out for 8 years, and I wasn't about to let them waltz back in just because their wallets were empty. But they weren't done yet. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a client meeting when my assistant, Claire, knocked on the door. She never interrupted meetings. "Sorry, Brian," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "There are 2 people in the lobby. They say they need to see you. No appointment." I frowned. "Tell them to leave their names, and I'll get back to them." She hesitated. "They say they're your kids." I stared at her for a second. Of course. I exhaled through my nose, My patience already wearing thin. Tell them to wait. I'll see them after this meeting. But apparently, patience wasn't in their vocabulary. 5 minutes later, I heard voices down the hall. Not just voices, raised voices. They hadn't waited. Josh and Haley had pushed past my assistant and were standing in the damn conference room doorway, right in front of my clients and my business partner, Martin. Dad, we need to talk, Josh said, arms crossed like he had any right to be pissed off. I stood up slowly, my jaw tightening. I'm in the middle of something. This can't wait, Haley snapped, stepping into the room like she owned the place. I clenched my jaw. Unbelievable. I glanced at Martin, who looked just as confused as my clients. Fine, I said, my voice sharp. Wait in my office. I'll be there when I'm done. Josh looked like he wanted to argue, but Haley grabbed his arm and muttered something under her breath. They left, and I turned back to my clients, forcing a calmness I did not feel. I wrapped up the meeting as quickly as I could, but my blood was already boiling. By the time I walked into my office, Josh was pacing while Haley sat on the couch, bouncing a fussy toddler on her lap. Neither of them looked happy. You've got some nerve, Josh said the second I closed the door. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Blocking us. Ignoring our calls, he snapped. We're your family, Dad. You don't just shut us out like that. I let out a slow breath, crossing my arms. Funny, that's exactly what you did to me. For years. Or did you forget about that? Haley sighed, shifting the baby in her arms. Look, we get it, okay? We screwed up, but we're trying to fix things. That's why we came here today. I scoffed. No, you're here because I wouldn't give you money. It's not about the money, Josh insisted, his voice rising. It's about the kids. They deserve to know their grandfather. I looked at the toddler in Haley's arms. A little boy with messy brown hair and big, round eyes. I didn't even know his name, because they never let me meet him. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. I've never even met them until today, I said evenly. You spent years shutting me out, and now you're dragging them here to guilt me into helping you? That's low, even for you. Josh's face turned red. Unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself? You're punishing us for making a mistake, and the only people getting hurt are these kids. I laughed. Actually laughed. You mean the kids you didn't let me meet for 8 years? The toddler started crying, probably picking up on the tension. Haley immediately jumped up to soothe him, bouncing him gently while shooting me a glare. Can we all just calm down? She said through gritted teeth. But Josh wasn't calming down. He was getting angrier by the second. You're acting like a bitter old man, he spat. Do you even care about anyone but yourself? That was it. I straightened, my voice dead calm. Get out. Josh looked like he was about to argue, but Haley grabbed his arm again. Let's go, she muttered, her face pale. They left, but not before Josh turned back, his eyes burning with anger. You're gonna regret this, he hissed. When you're old and alone, don't come crying to us. The door slammed shut behind them, and I just stood there, shaking with anger. I had been holding on to some small hope that maybe, deep down, they still cared. That maybe they truly wanted to fix things. But now I saw the truth. They didn't care about fixing our relationship. They cared about what I could do for them. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my mind kept replaying the scene in my office. The way Josh had looked at me, like I was the villain. The way Haley had played peacemaker, but only because they needed something. I told myself I was done, that I wouldn't give them another chance. Then, a few days later, I got an email. Subject line, let's start fresh. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was long, too long, filled with generic apologies. They admitted they had messed up, said they regretted shutting me out, claimed they wanted to make things right. But buried halfway through the email was the real reason they were reaching out. Sir, we've been working on a new business idea. It would mean the world to us if you could invest in it. We're not asking for a handout, just a little help to get started. Sir, I didn't even finish reading. I slammed my laptop shut, staring at the wall, my jaw tight. They hadn't changed. They didn't care about reconnecting. They didn't care about me. All they wanted was my money. I didn't respond. This time, I didn't even bother pretending to think about it. I was done. I blocked their emails, blocked their numbers, removed them from every social media account. For 8 years, they had no problem keeping me out of their lives. Now, they could stay out of mine. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from happiness or closure, just quiet. A realization. I had spent too long chasing after people who didn't give a damn about me. Too long waiting for something that was never going to happen. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And for a while, my life finally felt like mine again. I focused on work, on my wife, Allison, on our daughter, Sophie. My world was small, but it was real, genuine. Then, out of nowhere, Lori showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I was finishing my coffee, watching Sophie color at the kitchen table, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I figured it was a package delivery, but when I opened the door, there she was. Lori, standing on my porch like a ghost from a past I thought I had buried. She didn't look like the woman I remembered. The confident, sharp, put-together woman who once told me, without a shred of regret, that Rick made her feel appreciated. She was gone. This woman looked tired. Her hair, once styled to perfection, was dull and unkempt. The expensive clothes she used to obsess over? Gone. Replaced with something plain, almost frumpy. But it was her eyes that caught me the most. They were empty. She had always carried herself with this air of superiority, like she was always one step ahead. Now she just looked lost. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. "Brian," she said, her voice small. "Can I come in?" "No." She flinched, like she hadn't expected me to say it so easily. She swallowed hard. "I need to talk to you." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Say what you need to say, Lori." She glanced around, like she was afraid the neighbors might hear. Then, finally, she dropped the bombshell. "Rick's gone." I raised an eyebrow. "Gone?" She nodded, blinking rapidly. "His business went under. He drained everything we had. And then he left, Brian. He just disappeared." I stared at her, waiting for the part where this became my problem. She wiped at her face, and that's when I realized. She was crying. Lori never cried. Not when I confronted her about the affair. Not during the divorce. Not even when I told her I was done for good. But now? Now when she had nothing left. Now the tears came. "I have nothing," she whispered, voice cracking. "No money. No home. I don't even," she let out a shaky breath. "I don't even know where to go." I exhaled slowly, and then I asked the only question that mattered. "What exactly are you hoping to get from me, Lori?" She opened her mouth, then shut it, like she didn't even know how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I tilted my head slightly. "For everything? Or just for how things turned out?" More tears. She shook her head. "No. I mean it, Brian. I was selfish. I was stupid. I threw away the best thing I ever had for someone who didn't care about me." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, and then I shrugged. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but it doesn't change anything." Her lips parted slightly, like she had expected something else. I didn't give her that. "You made your choice," I continued, my voice calm. "You walked away, and now you're dealing with the consequences. That's not my problem anymore." Her shoulders slumped. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered. I needed you to know." I nodded once. "Now I know." And with that, I closed the door. She didn't knock again. She didn't call. That was the last time I ever saw Lori. After she left, I sat in my quiet house, staring at the walls, waiting to feel something. Anger, vindication, satisfaction. Nothing came. All I felt was relief. For the first time in years, I knew. I was finally free. Months passed, and life moved forward. Lori never reached out again. Not that I expected her to. Where she went, what she did, none of it mattered to me anymore. She was just a chapter in a book I had already closed. Josh and Haley never tried contacting me again, either. After I shut down their last attempt to squeeze money out of me, I guess they decided I wasn't worth the effort. Fine by me. The silence, for once, was something I welcomed. I focused on the life I had built. My company was thriving. My home was no longer just a house. It was a place filled with love. Sophie was growing fast, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. Every night, when I tucked her into bed and she reached up with her tiny hands to grab mine, I thought, this is what matters. Not the past, not the people who walked away, but the ones who stayed. Then, one day, completely by chance, I saw Haley. I was in a small coffee shop near my office, waiting for my order, when I heard a familiar laugh. It was faint, but I knew it instantly. I turned my head, and there she was, sitting by the window, stirring sugar into her drink. She looked different. Older, of course. But it wasn't just that. There was a tightness in her expression, a heaviness in her posture that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the confident, self-assured woman who once looked me in the eye and told me I needed to think about the bigger picture when I divorced her mother. She looked tired, like life had knocked her down a few times. For a moment, she didn't see me. I could have walked away, pretended I never saw her. But then her eyes lifted, and she froze. For a few long seconds, we just stared at each other. There was no dramatic reunion, no sudden rush of apologies or tears, just silence. She shifted in her seat, opening her mouth slightly like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I gave her a small nod, nothing more. Then, I turned around, picked up my coffee, and walked out. I didn't look back. That was the moment I realized I had finally let go. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, of Lori's betrayal, of the loneliness that followed. I had replayed conversations in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, questioning if I had made the right choices. But standing there in that coffee shop, looking into Haley's eyes and seeing hesitation instead of certainty, I knew I had made the right choice. And I didn't need their validation to know that I was better off. I stepped out onto the street, the sun warm on my face, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the past didn't feel like a weight on my shoulders. It felt like something I had finally left behind.